In this video, we're going to cover the basics of the healing process for parts and the emotional wounds that they carry. Now, if you have more advanced issues, whether that be a mental disorder diagnosis or something like memories of satanic ritual abuse, there's some additional issues that we may cover with you that are beyond the scope of this video before we start your individual ministry. But everything that we're going to cover here is the core of the healing process, whether your issues are moderate or severe. Everything applies. So, the first thing that most people tell me when they come here is that this idea of having another part of me communicate is a little bit daunting. They're a little bit nervous about it. Is this part going to spill some deep, dark, embarrassing secret? Is it going to take over and cause me to lose control of what I'm saying or doing? Or am I going to go into some kind of trance? Are you going to hypnotize me? Things like that. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. You see, our parts have been communicating our entire life. So all we're going to do is take advantage of what's already been happening. The difference is we're going to know how to recognize when the communication or the emotions are sourced in a part. So let me show you the basic ways that parts communicate. And emotions is actually the first one. Emotions can contain an amazing amount of information. They can tell us what we're afraid of, how connected we feel to the Lord, things like that. And all of those things can help us determine whether the emotions are coming from a part of you that holds a different perspective on life than your adult self. See, remember, parts are inner children. They see things from the perspective of the inner child. So I'm going to have some questions that I can ask of your emotions, and you can simply tell me how it feels in there about the question that I ask. And that's one way we can determine with almost certainty as to whether those emotions are coming from a part. And then when we step into the healing process, we'll continue to do the same thing. We can actually minister to emotions as much as we can verbal communication, because the emotions communicate content. Another way that parts have been communicating throughout your life that a lot of people will recognize is an inner voice. We may hear this inner voice telling us to do something or not to do something, and that doesn't mean you're schizophrenic. It literally can be a part that is communicating verbally just inside of yourself. That's a perfectly valid, normal, human way for our parts to behave. It's known that parts can do this. So we may get in touch with a part, for example, in response to prayer, and you may hear an inner voice and feel the emotions of the part. You will still stay in control. What I will do is ask questions of the inner voice. It will answer, and then you will tell me what it's saying, and we can work our way through the entire healing process that way. Now, the third way that parts communicate, and if you watched our video that included the symptoms of parts, you know that parts can temporarily come up front and take control and actually speak in day-to-day life, and then settle back down and your adult self is back in place. Well, that can happen in ministry without you losing control or getting out of touch with anything that happens. In fact, you will stay in control. You will know what is happening. You will be able to communicate yourself anytime you want through the entire process. And that's the way we want this to work. We're doing all of this within God's order and with the way God made us all as human beings, and we're not stepping outside of that. So, to understand the healing process, we do have to remember what we're working with. This is a part of you whose perspective on the world is defined by the wounds that caused it to form, and these wounds are in an inner child who has his own perspective on the world based on his emotional maturity level and the wounds that he's carrying. This is why behavior is different when parts are triggered. So the first objective in the healing process is to understand the perspective of the part. So I may enter into a dialogue where I'm asking questions of the part. This may be things like how the part feels about God, because a younger wounded part of you may not feel as close to God. God may not feel as safe in that part of you, for example, as he does in your more adult perspective. I'm going to want to know how the part feels about itself, most likely, because self-esteem or identity damage is one of the key issues that causes a part to stay at younger ages. And once I feel that I've got a pretty good perspective for how this part of you views life, and it's not that much different from having a conversation with somebody over coffee, then we can move into the next step of healing, which is going to be centered around healing the emotional wounds that cause that part to be here and keep it at younger ages. And to do that, what we are going to do is remember the things that we covered in one of our previous videos. That is, wounds come in layers. There can be a lot of emotions caught up in a wound, but the root of the wound is always identity damage. So we've got several different ways of understanding the identity issue that's at the root of any one wound. That may have come out of the earlier conversation and questions that we had of the part, but if it didn't, we can do things like examine the emotions down through the layers that the part is carrying and get to the root identity damage. And we're going to make sure that your heart can feel the identity damage, because that's the only way to get this part of your heart before the Lord for healing. Now, how does that happen? We get that root identity issue held up before the Lord, and then we ask the Lord to speak to it. And you see, that's the key to healing. When God speaks, his words carry a completely different weight than a person's. In a ministry setting, I might be able to say, that's not true, and it's liable to have no impact whatsoever. But the Lord can say something as simple as that, and it will completely change your perspective in this part of your heart. The reason for that is God's words create what he speaks. When you've got this part of you open, and you know you've got it open before him, when he speaks to it, he literally plants in that part of your heart the truth that you need to be set free from the lie. And as we covered in our earlier video, that means all of these symptoms that are built on this identity damage, once we've got all of the identity damage healed, they all come out. And then what happens is we see the proof that parts are held in place by emotional wounds. The part will actually start to grow up. Now, the part may plateau at an age that is younger than you. That only means that this part of your heart was wounded again at, say, 12 years old. It may have been an 18-month-old in you at the time, but it was wounded at the biological age of 12. So the Lord's process is wonderful. He'll have that part plateau right at 12 years old to let us know that there's another wound in there that needs to be healed. And the way your heart feels at that point will tell us what that wound is. We will follow exactly the same process for that. And usually parts plateau at ages up to about 20 years old. Once you hit the issue that's in the 17 to 20-year-old age range, in almost all cases, the part will automatically grow up and reach your biological age. Now, at that point, if we've done our job really well, there will no longer be any issues carried in the heart that keeps this part of your mind fragmented. And as I said, if we've done our job really well, this part will automatically blend, or some people say merge, with your adult core self. So what we're going to do is we're going to monitor the age of the part as each wound gets healed. Now, not everybody's going to get the exact age of the part, but you will know when this part of your heart feels like it's at the same maturity level with you. So as we go through that process of finding parts, all of the parts will go through the same thing. They will mature and they will blend with you. And the way you know that we're at or near the finish line is this. You will feel like you're in an adult mindset the majority of the time. Now, you may not know what that feels like till you get there, but when it happens, you will know. You will know it because things that used to trigger you will be safely filed in a mental place of understanding, where you will be able to respond to it without leaning on damaging coping mechanisms or triggers. The triggers that used to be there, in fact, will be replaced by self-control and sober-mindedness because you're going to be responding as a mature adult, not a wounded inner child. And these coping mechanisms and mental confusion and things like that will be out of your mind because they're no longer carried in an inner child. You're now a healed adult. And finally, really the most important thing about the healing process is that God's residing peace will grow over time. Now, just a quick note, this doesn't mean that our lives are going to be free from pain and trouble. We're still humans. We're still living in an imperfect world. Things can still hurt us. We can still have challenges. The issue is, are we responding to those things as an adult or as a wounded child? When you're done with the ministry, you will be functioning with one heart, one mind, one soul in connection with the Lord, handling things with a Christ-like view and an adult's level of maturity. So our prayer is that this is exactly what you find at the end of the healing process.